Hi, I'm Anastasia Jaegerman. Welcome back to the Optimum Tide. I have a repeat guest today. We're going to do part 2 of our previous podcast. I have Andy Kramer with me. Thanks for joining me again. Last podcast, we discussed the ACORD application, and this is part 2. But just for the folks that haven't seen the first podcast, let me give a little bit of Andy's background. Andy's got a Bachelor of Science degree at St. John University in Minnesota and an MBA at the University of Missouri in Kansas City in operation management. Yep. He has 30 plus years of experience in the life insurance industry, including 11 years in reinsurance and some at the direct carrier level and the distribution for 4 years and bank assurance for 10 years plus. He has a Six Sigma Black Belt, Master Black Belt certification during your previous life at reinsurance, and now you're at M Financial Group. Welcome back, and tell us a little bit more about this project. Last time we spoke about the ACORD data set for life application, and we said we were going to talk about the electronic health records data standards. So tell me, why did you start this? And tell me how this occupies your daily hours.
Okay, thank you, Anastasia. I'm glad to be here. The electronic health record data standard project actually started shortly after the pandemic hit. And the reason it started is because, as everybody recalls, the industry went from piloting electronic health records to implementing them overnight. And we were consistent with everybody else. And I realized that when we were getting these electronic health record packages, we would get not only the PDF file with all of the medical records, but we'd get an XML file with it. And when I opened them, it was like a foreign language, and there was a lot of codes and a lot of redundancy. And I thought there's got to be a way to convert this into something that can be more useful in the life insurance arena. So I talked to some folks that I knew that were knowledgeable in this space. And in fact, one of them was your former medical director, Dr. Paulo Pino, and he was the one who actually thought it was a great idea to dig into this. And the more we dug into it, we realized that there's some benefit here for the life insurance industry. So we spun up that project in 2001, and we quickly jumped in and realized, hey, there's a lot of interest in this. We had a team of maybe 25 or 30 people, and we probably had 15 people on most of the calls. So there was a lot of interest in the industry at that time.
That's interesting, because when I talk to my colleagues, the main thing I hear also with electronic health records is how much noise there is behind it and how much data there is there. And how do you weed through this data? Do you want to tell me more about how you manage to do that? Because sometimes we run across electronic health records and you have to retrain kind of the underwriter's brain at thinking. The underwriter of the future should definitely have critical thinking in place, because it's not the same way to underwrite at all anymore. I want you to share with us what type of generation process you went through. I know there's several generations of this project, so I'll let you speak to that.
Sure. The first generation project was simply we realized there was a lot of redundancy and a lot of extraneous data in those electronic medical files. There was data relating to billing. There was data relating to patient care. Do we really care? What nurse visited? They took the patient's temperature at 6 p.m. on a Thursday night. We don't care as underwriters. Right. So we only care about the output. So we realized that we could streamline, but we received some really good advice from our ACORD data guys, that the data architects that were working with us. They said, let's not create our own standard. Let's just use what's out there, use the healthcare data standards, but modify them. So we basically, our first generation project, took the CCDA architecture, the standard architecture in the healthcare industry, and we just stripped out all the data that's not relevant to underwriters. And that was that redundant data that we talked about. The other conversations we had were about, what do we want to do with ICD-9 codes, ICD-10 codes, SNOMED codes. And the advice, when we realized that there were 350,000 SNOMED codes, 79,000 ICD-10 codes, they're changing every 6 months. We don't want to be in the business of trying to map all that and keep straight with all that, because there were vendors out in the insurance industry today that do that, and they have an army of people that maintain all that. So we didn't want to have to sign up for that, since we're all working as volunteers for ACORD. The industry representatives on ACORD are all volunteers. So we don't want to have to build something that would collapse under its own weight. So all we did was simply stripped out the non-mortality related data from those data files.
So you went to, I think we have a slide that we're showing right now about the numbers of rows. Explain that to me.
Yeah.
What this 93, I see numbers, 93% reduction. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah. So this slide shows, it kind of tells the story for our Gen 1 project.
Okay.
The third bullet down talks about the categories of information that are in the CCDA standards. We've got problem list, medication, physical measurements, encounters, social history, plan of treatment, and laboratory test results. Okay. We took I think it was a health information exchange file on a 71-year-old diabetic. So it was a pretty extensive file, and it was 24,790 rows of XML at that time. And we basically applied the new data standards, and the resulting file size was only 1,829 rows. So it was a 93% file size reduction, which to me, that was very enlightening. That shows to me that we were adding value, because if you think about an unwieldy 25,000 rows of XML, that's going to be hard to manage, hard to analyze, a lot of noise. By compressing the file that size, we're able to get to the data that really does matter. That
pertains to the underwriting. Oh, this is a really nice slide. I like this. Explain this.
So I mentioned the categories. The categories that I mentioned in the third bullet on the prior slide is the middle circle, the light gray circle, medications, physical measurements, problems, etc. So those are all the categories. The medications section would also work not only on the electronic health records, but also on an RX report, because it's the same information. It's medication, it's dosage, it's all the structured data around those medications. Same with lab results. The lab results that we've defined would work for clinical labs, like in an electronic health record. They would also work for insurance labs. If we needed a data standard that we wanted to normalize all the existing data to, this would be a good data standard, so that you're analyzing all your data in the same way. And then the outer circle on that bullseye would show all of the use cases, all the types of information you could use these data standards on. You could use them on APS summaries, having a vendor summarize all your paper APSs that are in your file for the last 30, 40 years. Yes. You could use it for health information exchange data. You could use it for electronic medical records. So you could get all that data on the same platform so you can easily analyze it over time.
That would be super useful for the underwriters. Now tell me about more, so you've graduated really from generation 1. You're in generation 2 now?
Yeah. So let's show this example.
Show the example again, because I'd like to show the redundancies of how this is important.
Yeah. So I recognize that you probably can't read the actual data, but that's not important. The important thing are the call-outs there. In the problems list on this particular case, again, this was a 71-year-old diabetic with hypercholesterolemia, hypertension. He had quite a few things that he was wrestling with, but his problem list was 1,093 rows in the original data set, and we were able to apply the standard and reduce it to 155 rows, but we retained the structured data, the ICD-9 and ICD-10 codes. We've got the problem name, whether it was active or resolved, the start date, stuff like that. So we've retained all the information that an underwriter would need to see, and we got rid of all of the other stuff that's just noise to an underwriter.
Which is good, because you and I, in a previous conversation, we talked about certain codes that doctors, certain physicians use for billing purposes. And sometimes this is where the line gets blurred, especially in electronic health records, where the critical thinking comes in place. We talked about this a little bit briefly about Ozempic.
Yeah.
Is it being prescribed by an endo? Or is it being prescribed by a GP? And where are you, finding this difference?
So if you think about why what's the objective of medical records, right? One of the primary, and the electronic medical records and all the codes, one of the primary reasons for them is to make the billing adjudication easy for the healthcare insurers. Right. So we need to recognize that, and we will see situations where patients are potentially overcoded just to make sure the doctor gets paid for the treatment that he's prescribing. He may not be prescribing something that's a standard off-the-shelf treatment, it might work. So he wants to make sure he gets compensated. So he might overcode. So an underwriter really has to scrutinize all this information. When you look at an RX report, you look at an APS, and you're trying to reconcile all this, we're probably going to find conflicting information. We're going to find information that may take us down a dead-end path. We just have to think through all of that.
We probably see a different set of training for the underwriters, because I remember, old school underwriting, back in this will date me, but anyways, late 80s or 90s, like training was not talk like this. We didn't see a holistic case. It was if and when, like we mentioned. So, and that type of underwriting will need to move. The next generation of underwriters will be completely different, and I think that it takes a lot of critical thinking, and we have like future podcasts in the future where we'll talk about critical thinking, and that's important that we address that as reinsurers, because we're seeing, and as direct carriers also, because we're seeing the trend. And in 5 years, our industry will look completely different.
They will. And the way we underwrite will be completely different. Yeah. So let's hold that thought. Yeah. And let's talk about
let's see about your generation too. I'm excited.
Yeah. So when we completed Gen 1, we realized one of the reasons we did this project is so that we could have true data interoperability throughout the entire life insurance value chain, from producer to carrier to reinsurer. Because one of the challenges that I saw back in that migration from paper to image, the carriers were first to implement the imaging, and they had all the infrastructure, but then they were still sending paper to the reinsurers. The reinsurers took a couple years after that before they had that infrastructure to take advantage of it. What I'm trying to do is build the structure so that everybody can take that step into the future together, and everybody can get the value from it. Because if we don't do something like this, I think the reinsurers are going to be sitting at the end of the process still working with PDFs when the carriers have all the technology and all the analytics around the data. And I'm trying to create an infrastructure so everybody can benefit from it as we all move forward together. But for our Gen 2, we realized we wouldn't have interoperability with Gen 1 because you can't use the data in that other format. It's streamlined. You're looking at less data, but you can't just feed that into your rules engine. Okay. So Gen 2, we started with the top 200 medical conditions that one of the members on our project team provided, and we defined all the risk factors for those top 200 medical conditions. Because with that format, you can feed it into a rules engine. You can analyze it. You'll have all the risk factors you need to make an underwriting decision. So it's a much more efficient data structure. Okay. And we can take a look at an example here.
Let's look at one.
So, and this is coronary artery disease. The first, and the table on the left-hand side, I realize is too small to see. So I'll just focus on the right-hand side, the call out there. For coronary artery disease, what an underwriter looks at, age of onset, when were they diagnosed? Right. 46-year-old age of onset of coronary artery disease, not a good thing. Right. What was the ejection fraction? How efficient is the heart pumping today? How effective is it? What's their current age? So how long have they had it? And what was the date of last treatment? What are they having for treatment? You can see the treatment there is. Treatment's further down. But it's surgery versus medication, etc.
Right.
What's the family history? What's the gender? What's the risk factors? Nicotine use, hypertension, BMI, lipids, diabetes, etc. Yes. And what vessels are occluded and what percentage for each of them. And then the list goes down. It goes to treatment type, and it goes to credits like any lifestyle changes, exercise, stuff like that. So we try to be very holistic.
Oh, that's interesting that you even added credits. That's good. I mean, it's very good because it's very succinct to every disease process. But that would be generation 2. And is this, we're talking really because there's always that lingo of generative AI, and that's how we're going to kind of get there.
That's right. I think this is an enabler. Yeah. This is a key enabler. So where I see the generative AI fitting on this particular slide, Gen 1 went from that CCDA healthcare data standard of 25,000 rows to Gen 2 with the ACORD EHR Gen 1. And that basically, instead of finding the needle in the haystack, we got a handful of needles. We have the data that we need, but which data do we really need to use? Well, I think AI is going to be a key tool to get from Gen 1 to Gen 2.
Yes.
It's pulling out the risk factors in a structured way and categorizing them and putting them in a structured data format that can then be used by a decision engine to make that underwriting decision. So going across the bottom, we went from 25,000 rows of XML to the 1,800 rows of the JSON in Gen 1. My hypothesis is if we take that, and we're doing this analysis right now, take that very same file on that 71-year-old diabetic,
yes.
I'll bet the final EHR Gen 2 will only be between 50 and 100 rows of JSON.
Are we there now? Are we there yet?
Yeah, we're testing that right now. We've got the file out with a number of folks that are running through this data standard to see, if it works. It's kind of like that first test case. Mm-hmm. I'm certain we're going to have to come back and modify it because nothing's perfect in Gen 1, but it's a very good start.
Right. And then, this is super exciting because Gen 2 is here, almost about to launch, or if you want, hatch.
Yep.
But the experiment, the future will tell.
That's right.
And the future, and being 30 years in this career, you as well, this is probably the most exciting time I've had in my career in underwriting to see all the changes that have happened. And I know we always go back to COVID, but that was the catalyst that the industry somehow needed.
That's right.
To just move from, our industry has been very conservative for many, many years. And the approach of what we're doing here is, I didn't think that we would get there. But it's impressive.
Yeah, one thing, as I've been working on this project, I've done a lot of thought as to how will this change the role of the underwriter and the way they do their job. And if you think back to the old days with a chronological handwritten APS, they were typically in the chronology oldest to most recent visit, right? So it was easy to get that entire story of that applicant. And we as underwriters, like to know the story. But with EHR, or with the, since we've moved from handwritten notes to the typewritten notes with the EMR vendors, it's kind of in reverse order. You get the latest stuff first, and then every page is a surprise, right? And it took a while to get used to that. Where I think we're going to go, though, both of those examples are like reading the encyclopedia from A to Z on each case, right? You're reading every page of every document. Where I think underwriting is going to go is we're going to have your decision engines to resolve the easy stuff, the hypercholesterolemia, the blood pressure and stuff like that. It's going to flag the medical conditions that we as underwriters need to work on, and then everything else will be covered by the system. So we won't need to read the file end to end from A to Z. All we need to do is go to those pages that pertain to the medical condition that the system can't resolve. So that's how I think it's going to change the way we underwrite. Definitely. So, but it's going to take underwriting management will need to actually make sure they give air cover, because if you miss something that was on one of those other pages that you didn't read, you can't string up the underwriter because you're getting efficiency gains. So that's where I see the biggest conflict is going to be going forward. How does management handle this, and what do they incent, and do they enable the underwriters to take that more efficient view?
And how will you, and it will have to take a different approach at auditing also.
Exactly.
Because, as a reinsurer, when we go audit a client, we have access to, their thought process, their manuals, or whatever data set they had. But how will this be handled in a point? Well, let's say an underwriter missed an oversight on an electronic health record that would pertaining to the other history. Yeah. So it will be interesting to see how we develop a training system and audit different categories for audits, and so on and so forth. And the underwriter of the future, and I know we've repeated it, and there's buzzwords in the industry about critical thinking. I can't say it enough about critical thinking, and we do have some sessions also on our website regarding critical thinking. We had a great presentation, give great example for the underwriters. The underwriters want to refer to our website. They're there. And we'll also talk about future podcasts, and I'm sure that it will be an interest also, is Ozempic. And we've talked about GLP drugs and how they've changed the immediate future, but how they project how this drug seems to be like almost a miracle drug, and all the benefit it brings, from diabetes to vascular impairments to kidney and to all the impairments. The more and more I read about Ozempic, the more you think this is like snake oil. It's going to cure everything. But I'm a little bit leery, and I'm a doubting Thomas, so time will tell. So maybe I've got a bit of actuaries in me when I want to let time elapse and see what happens. But the future looks interesting for our jobs and for underwriting, basically. So thanks for joining me again today. It was a great session, great discussion, and I look forward to future discussions in the future.
All right. Thanks, Anastasia.
Thanks, Andy.